if you played Germans, you flew alongside the Germans, and the Americans flew alongside the Americans. And it was, confrontational World War II combat. And we would, sort of role play in that we would determine the battlefield terrain, what the combat floor, combat ceiling would be for the engagement, and would start on opposite sides of the room and move into engagement, and then eventually the aircraft would come close to each other in the engagement and be able to shoot at each other. And it was a really fascinating game, but it was utilizing 1/72nd scale aircraft. And you would, well, I'll go into that in a later video, but what we're doing with the NycosRPG experience here is we are allowing players to come to us directly through the chat channel. So if you wish to participate, you simply just say hello in the chat, and once we've established communication, then we determine which player you want to play, player 1, 2, 3, which of course mean nothing at this point, they're just templates. And then we spin the spinner and determine what type of game setting we're going to play in. As a multifaceted role-play games master, I literally can play these in any of the different genre, and so we would literally spin the wheel, and then it will tell us. Yeah, let's move on from that one. It was the joke one that we put on there. Demon Salvation, and so this would be along the lines of the environment of shows like Charmed or Angel, that kind of idea, that your character is of a demonic nature and you're trying to gain redemption by doing good deeds, that kind of thing. We had archetypes that you would pick wouldn't necessarily be based on any of the standard role-play games or whatever that you would know, but you would be able to pick up and go with whatever that was. There's deficit spending, so that would be modern era trying to change governmental expenditures based on whatever the scenario is. Again, part of a gag one. There's actually like 4 or 5 that are on there just for goose, because I haven't figured them all out yet. And twice on the disco season, that's pretty crazy. Come on. Get something useful. Okay, so Dawn Soldier, for example, is World War II era, beginning of the war, American involvement with the concept of developing super soldiers. Think along the lines of Captain America, but the different abilities that manifest would be based on what the characters want to play. Each player would choose an archetypical soldier with their regular soldiery job, and then you would go through this process. So if you want to play, feel free to jump into the chat. Just say hello, and we'll coordinate to figure out which of the player spaces you want to be in and build the character on the spot. The mechanical system we're going to be using is something I call Playgrounds. It's a mechanism I devised so that we can dispense with the dice rolling and with the drudgery, the mechanical problems that role-play games tend to bring to the table to make it difficult to play. And so it's quick play, quick learn, and we just start rolling with the story. So anyway, so until such time as we have players join in, I'm just going to keep rambling, and that's okay too. I was discussing my origins, and when I started playing, my very first play session was really the only session that I got before I started storytelling. I know that's a kind of a crazy way to go about it, but I was fundamentally, as a 11-year-old kid, I was kind of trapped as far as what I could pursue. Dungeons and Dragons wasn't yet released. I had played it in advance of its release with one of the guys that designed it, and we pursued a very short storyline, and I learned the mechanics of the game, but that was as far as it went. Once that was done, of course, I had to choose my own methodology, since I didn't have the really cool polyhedral dice, they weren't even available at game stores yet. In fact, game stores were pretty arcane, I guess, in those days. I do remember that the one nearest us was Daylight Hobbies, and literally the reason it was called Daylight Hobbies is that they operated from dawn until dusk, which meant that people could go into the store, were on their way to work even to pick up games and stuff. The owner was very interested in getting the property out to people, but it was fundamentally a board game store. There wasn't really a call yet for role-play materials. There were no trading card games per se. You would go in there and buy a deck of cards if you wanted. You could go in and get a cribbage board or backgammon, that kind of thing. But he also had, very, very early, he had some of the materials for role play, but it wasn't really for role play. It was the like hex paper and pencils and erasers and that kind of thing. And he had lots of different colored dice, but they were all standard. They were not yet in the large number quantities of polyhedrals. And so it was a couple of years yet before those properties became available. As a matter of fact, I didn't get my first DM's guide for almost, or Player's Handbook and DM's Guide for almost 2 years because they hadn't been released yet. When the game first came out, it was the blue box, and before that it was the white box, but both of those were within a short period of time. And the white box was basically the chainmail rules with Eldritch Wizardry, Gods, Demigods, and Heroes, and Eldritch and Blackmore. And those were fundamentally the 3 books that you got in the little box set. And when you got it, you did get your first set of dice. I do remember my first set were mixed polyhedrals. My D20 was a pale blue. They were all made out of a pretty soft plastic, but it was brittle. I remember the day of tragedy when, alas, I dropped my D20 upon the floor and it broke. That was awful. Hello. Do I hear somebody on Discord? I don't think so. Hey, I got a note about the game coming up. If you guys are local, just know that I am affiliated with a game store who is our sponsor. If you notice the little logo down in the bottom corner there, way over here, is the logo for Board Games Paradise. And have to resolve a couple of things, so please stick with me for a second here. Yay, chit chat. Anyway, so in those early days, games mastery was simply draw a map, plug in monsters, guide the players through the map, kill the monsters, hand out loot, hand out experience points, hand out advancement, repeat. well, without that, of course, without the players on here, it's difficult to run a game. So I will continue to talk for a while longer. I anticipate being on here till at least 11 to make sure we get some information out. So perhaps I will just give some information about the world of Nykos. Sorry for doing two things at once here. Sorry, I'm being a writer right now. I'm plunking away on my keyboard, so if I'm silent, it's only because I'm focusing on what I'm typing. So, as you may or may not know, I'm a ghostwriter, spec writer, and such, as well as professional game master and storyteller, and now publisher. But Alrighty, so I'm almost done with the bit of writing I'm having to do here. So again, I apologize for being a little aloof. Going back to what I was talking about, the sponsor, Board Games Paradise, store in Redlands, California. And if you want to play live stream games with me, I mean, sorry, not live streams, but actual live games with me, we do have openings still on Mondays at 6 p.m. We run until the store closes, which is usually right around 10 o'clock. And it is an ongoing campaign on the world of Nycos, which your familiarity with will develop over time, so it's not expected that you have to know it. But as it is a home-brewed world, it will not fit any of the currently printed materials directly, although many of the details are similar. In other words, I do have a race that approximates to the elves, the dwarves, and so on, but they're all named and defined differently. So, excuse me. Bit of hiccups. One more little detail here. All right, so now I've burned through a couple more minutes of dabbling with my text, and I apologize for that. Only because it's taking away from the conversation, but at this point, the conversation is just me, so there you have it. So in that first group of sessions, first year, couple of years actually, that I ran stories, it was pretty much draw a map, run people through it, And what was particularly funny is that I had a very, very, very limited idea of what monsters I could include, because in the session that I was involved with, I literally only had about 4 creatures, and my monster chart, therefore, my wandering monster chart was literally those 4 creatures. Remembered that there were orcs, and there were skeletons, and there were these horrible things called foot pads, and I didn't know at the time what that term even meant. I hadn't heard it in my life as an 11-year-old. And footpad they were described as following our pathway, and they attacked us in the night, and they went for attempting to cut our throats. So what I had in my head at that point as a 11-year-old kid, now I do have to give a little bit of background. The creatures, let me rephrase that. The world was filled with people who were advocating for a rather hippie lifestyle. And so they had these emblems that represented the hippie lifestyle.